Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Nedarim Yudalid. Nedarim 14. We'll start on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, where at the Mishnah of the new chapter. So the chapter begins Elu Mutarin. These are the vows that if you make them, you're going to still be allowed to eat the meat or the food of your friend. If you say the following, if you say Chulin she'ochalcha, if you say that which I eat from you is chulin. Well, if you say that which I eat from you is chulin, that's going to be okay. Meaning to say, because you're saying that which you eat from your friend is chulin, of course it's okay. If you say kibas or chazir, if you say that which I eat from you is like the food of a pig, like the meat of a pig, that's also going to be okay. Why? Because as we've said already in the tractate several times, as we're going to say again, that the basic idea is that if you take a vow on something that's a davar hanadar that you yourself vowed to make prohibited, or that can be vowed to make prohibited, then we're going to say the vow takes effect. But if it was a davar ha'asar, if it was something that was inherently prohibited already, then the vow does not take effect. So the chazir is a basar, is a davar hanadar. And so therefore, since it was a davar hanadar, the vow will not take effect. Davar asur, therefore, since it's already inherently prohibited, the vow will not take effect. Or if you take the vow and say, your food is to me like a kavodas kachavim, like idolatry or ka'oras uvuvim. This is the skin, they pierce the heart, and therefore after they take the skin which they pierced opposite the heart and they offer them. It was takrovas avodas kachavim, was an offering of idolatry. Or it can avail as utrefos, like this non-kosher animals, or shkatzim or amasim or reptiles, or kechalas aron u'ketrumaso, or like the chala offering that was given to Aaron, or like the truma that was given to Aaron, i.e. to the Kohanim, not to actually Aaron. And all of these things mutter, since you were matfis, since you did the association with the davar ha'asar, therefore it's going to be permitted. So the Ran says, Kol minei asurin katani. The Ran tells us, lists different types of prohibitions. Asurin ba'achila, like the meat of a pig. Asurin ba'ana, prohibited to have benefit, like the idolatry. Asurin ba'ana, she'elam ba'tola. The next category, the idolatry, you can nullify it. If you renounce your ownership over it, then it's no longer idolatry. But if you have a takrovas avodas kachavim, an offering to idolatry, like the oros levuvim, then the Ran says it's asurim bana, it's prohibited to have benefit, she'elam ba'tola, and you can't nullify it. And then the Ran says v'chamira me'avodas kachavim, the oros levuvim is stricter than regular idolatry. The heat that an avodas kachavim is ba'tola, because avodas kachavim, the idolatry itself, you could actually nullify, whereas takrovas avodas kachavim e'lo ba'tola. And the takrovas, the thing that was offered to idolatry, cannot be nullified. And then the next category, says the Ran, is Vitana Nami Shasurim Bachil Bavad V'yesh Ben Tumas Nevelos. It says, then we've talked about things that are just prohibited to eat, but they're tamei, like a carcass, V'tumas and Chamura B'kadasha. And then the next category are those things which their tuma is so severe that it's even the size of a lentil becomes tamei, and that's like shkatzim haramasim. That's like these shkatzim haramasim, these reptiles. So we've seen all the categories that are listed here, and then the chalas aron trumaso, and there, what's the reason why that is listed? So the Ran tells us, shame, even though the prohibition is going to happen, you might have thought it's a davar hanadar because you call it truma, you call it chala. Nevertheless, you do the kriya shame. Nevertheless, it's not considered a davar hanadar because the prohibition comes from the Torah. So that's how the Ran says we need each one. The next line of the Mishnah states, Omer le'ishto harei atalai ki'ima. If somebody says to his wife, behold, you are upon me like my mother, meaning to say he was matfis to davar ha'asar because the mother is an erva, she's prohibited, obviously. and you compare your wife to that, so therefore, really, you would have thought the vow doesn't take effect. But nevertheless, the Mishnah says, "Posrin lo petach makom acher, lo yakel rosho kach." We are going to require him to get a petach, to go to a chacham or to a court of hadyotos to have it annulled, so that he doesn't become used to making vows in this category. So you call Rosh Halakach. The Gemara is going to explain that. So anyway, the first thing is the Gemara says, Taima, what's the reason why the meat is permitted in the first category? The Amar Chulin she'ochocha, that which I eat from you is chulin. So you mean to say, Ha'amar la chulin, the Gemara wants to infer, let's say you would say la chulin, that which I eat from you is not chulin, which would imply that it's a sacrifice. It would be not, it's not chulin, it's a sacrifice, and it would be prohibited. So mani mas nisan. So who is our Mishnah like, who says that which is not chulin is prohibited? It cannot be Rabbi Meir. It can't be Rabbi Meir because, as we've already said several times in our tractate, Rabbi Meir does not say that you can infer. We're on top of Yudalad Amud Aleph. Rabbi Meir does not accept the position that you can infer. Rabbi Meir does not say Miklalav from what we say is not permitted. You can infer Atashamein. We can infer the opposite. So therefore, because Rabbi Meir says that if you say that which is chulin is not prohibited to me, you cannot infer that which is not chulin is prohibited to me. Rabbi Meir says you can't say that. So we can't say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, because that's not Rabbi Meir's position. So rather we want to say Ella Rabbi Yehuda. You want to say that our Mishnah, which says that if you say it's not chulin, it's prohibited, it must be Rabbi Yehuda, because that's what Rabbi Yehuda does say. But why would we have to repeat it? Hainu Reisha. We already learned that back in Daf Yudam Beis, that we say, if you say this is not chulin, that which I will eat from you is not kosher. And we've established that was like Rabbi Yehuda. So why would we have to repeat that here? So therefore, what's the reason why we start off by saying that which I eat from you is chulin is permitted? So the Gemara says, so the answer is, Aidi de Ketani Kabasar Chazir Kavods Kachavim. So the first answer of the Gemara is, no, it's just because since it's already telling us those categories which are permitted, if you compare it to the meat of a pig or to idolatry, those things are permitted. So it tells us chulin to tell us that's another category of something that's permitted. Meaning to say that there is no real reason why it was listed, but the only reason is agav garara deshara pasach behachi, because it wants to go into categories of things that are permitted. It's saying this case of the chulin, but there's no real reason. That's what the Ran says. Lav with gufei yitzrach v'lav with the UK. We're not inferring anything, and we're not learning any halacha from it. So that's the first answer. But Ravina gives a second answer. Ravina says, "Achi katani." No, this is how you have to read our Mishnah. The elu mutarin kichulin. These are the things which are just as permitted as if it was chulin, meaning to say that that's the colon. The elu mutarin kichulin colon. Now we're going to give the categories that are as permitted as if you had said, I'm not making a sacrifice against it. And what is that? Kebasar chazir, kavodas kachavim. If you say, for example, that your food is like the meat of the food is like pork or like idolatry, then the vow will not take effect. It's as permitted as if it is chulin. And if it had not listed chulin, if it hadn't given this headline, then havamina, then I might have thought by she'ela, that you require she'ela, you require going to a chacham for these categories. If you say this meat in front of me, my friend's meat is like pork to me, I might have thought you have to go to a chacham to annul it. But now that we said it's comparable to chulin, we see you don't even need to go to a chacham to annul it. So the Gemara says, Umi ika la suke daita al daita hachi. Would you really have thought that you would have had to go to a chacham to annul a vow that you made by comparing something to basar chazir or idolatry? Would you really have thought that? Hame diktani sefer. We wouldn't have thought that because it says in the concluding clause, Ha'omer le'ishto. Someone says to his wife, Harei atalai ki ima. Somebody says to his wife, you're like my mother. In that case alone, we require him to go to the court to get it annulled. We call the reisha. This implies that in the case we compare it to idolatry or to pork, in the former causes, you wouldn't be requiring to go to a chacham. So therefore, what's the reason? So the Gemara says that's a good question. In fact, we said you're right. There is. We go back to the first reason. Chulin was just brought mamela naspa. It was not brought for any specific reason, not to make any inferences, but just because we're going into the category of other things that are permitted. So therefore, we start off with a real softball, as we say, a layup, to remind us of this principle. Gemara now asks the question: Minani mili. How do we know this basic idea that if somebody is matfis bedavar asar lo mitzvah, if somebody makes an association with something that is inherently prohibited, it's not going to become, the vow will not take effect. Where do we know this basic idea? So the Gemara says it's based upon the fact that the verse says about vows, ish ki dor neder la Hashem, a person who takes a vow to Hashem, which means ad sheyidor bedavar hanador. So he says this means until you take the vow, until you take the vow about something that is the only time a vow takes effect is if you do it on something that you could vow to make prohibited, but not a davar asur. And we learn this out from the double expression ishki dor neder. So therefore, it has to be on something that's a davar nadar. Well, the Gemara says, well, once we're establishing that from the Yidor Neder, but now we have a different diuk. It says, you could say if you make a vow about a davar asur, it should also be applicable. Because it uses that expression, asur isar. So therefore, that should also learn that, just like we said, ishki Yidor Neder applies to davar nadar ish. So we should say also, sorry, sir, should apply to a davar asur if you take such a vow. So says the Gemara. So the Gemara says, no, we need the words sorry, sir for the following brisa. Ezo isar amor b'Torah. This is based upon the following brisa, because the brisa says, what is the prohibition that is listed in the Torah? And we had this earlier. We had this brisa said it earlier, that if you say, if you say that this is going to be prohibited upon me, like the day I will not drink wine, like the day of my father's death or the day of my Rebbe's death, meaning to say that the double expression of sar isar comes to include even if you're matfis, that something that is prohibited just to him alone. And then we're going to send to those circumstances that the vow will take effect. So that's the idea. So that we learned out from the brisa. So therefore, we'll read the Ran. Lashminan the afagav the choli nidro beneder shlo nasar el lo levada. Even if the vow is only upon him himself, i.e., the day that his father died. So then we're going to say the vow will take effect. So because if we would not have this verse, if we did not have this verse, I might have thought, I might have thought that the vow needs to be applicable to everyone. Therefore, the pasuk tells us to last sorry, even if it was just upon yourself alone, and you took the vow on a category that was just for you, like your Rebbe's death, or the Rebbe's death, because you're the student of the Rebbe. Therefore, we're going to say it's still applicable. Okay, so now we're up to the next line in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Omer ve'ishto harei at alai k'ima. If he says to his wife, behold, you're upon me like my mother, then we're going to say that even though the vow, technically speaking, doesn't take effect, he needs a petach. He needs to get it annulled. So the Gemara asks, "Veraminu, we have a contradictory source because the Brisa says, "Arei like basar ima." If he says to his wife, "You're like my mother," or "Basar achos," you're like my sister. Ka'arla, like this prohibited fruit to klaya karam. These are things it have any benefit from the arla and the klaya karam. So then we're going to say under those circumstances, well, Amar Kum, then the neder will not be applicable because he made the neder, he was matfis on something that's inherently prohibited. So Amar Abaye, so we see from here that according to this source, this price is saying basically that the vow does not take effect at all. But according to our Mishnah, if you're matfis with the mother, you do need to go to a chacham and get it annulled. So the Gemara says, so Rava's answer is, Abaye's answer is, yeah, biblically speaking, it's not binding. But rabbinically speaking, we require you to go get it annulled. So our Mishnah is talking rabbinically, and this Bryce is talking biblically. Rava draws a different distinction. The Bryce, which says you don't need to get it annulled, that's referring to a Torah scholar, because this is a one-time thing, and he's not going to infer from here other halachos. He knows the difference. Whereas our Mishnah talks about Amma Aretz, because if we're going to say that you don't need a she'ela, they don't need to go to a chacham, he's going to come, and he'll be lenient in this area, and he'll make other vows that are applicable, and he won't realize that he'll commit a sin. So that's the distinction. Abaye's distinction was one is biblical, one is rabbinic, and Rabbi's distinction, one is a Torah scholar, one is an Amma Aretz. Tanya, we have support for this. In this case, Tanya is the equivalent of benichusa. That even though that is a language that we do find in Shas, it's not the most common use of Tanya, but it is enough. It is enough to say that this is not one of the examples of Lashon Meshuna of Nedarim. Tanya, I know the Torah. Someone who takes a vow about the Torah, or Amar Kum. He has not said anything. He has not said anything if he makes a vow about the Torah. But even though if he makes a vow on the Torah, we'll see what this means, that the Rabbi Yochanan says he still needs to go to a chacham to get it annulled, even though he said nothing. Whereas Rav Nachman says, Talmud chacham ein lo tzarich she'ela. If he was a Torah scholar, since the vow doesn't really take effect, he doesn't need to go to a chacham. It's completely null and void. So what does this mean? Anoder b'Torah. So what does this mean? So we're going to say that this example that we're referring to is that that the Sefer Torah is in front of him and he swears, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. So biblically speaking, the oath is not going to be valid. So that's what we're going to analyze now on the top of your Dalet on the base on type of 14b. Tanya, I know the Torah will Amar Kum. Somebody takes a vow by the Torah, an oath by the Torah. He says, what does he say? Basically, the Torah was in front of him, and he takes an oath. He says, by this Torah, I will do this, or by this Torah, I will not do this. Lo Amar Kum. He has basically said nothing. Why has he said nothing? Because the vow is not going to be binding, and he doesn't have to keep it. Because we say that it was intent to swear by the holiness of the parchment, and that's not a lashon that works by an oath. By an oath, you have to swear by Hashem's name, or else it is not binding. So I know the B'Torah lo Amar Kum, because you took the oath by the parchment and not by the name of God. But if you take the oath by what's written in it, i.e. by God's name, Dvar Kayam, then it's going to be applicable and the oath is binding. But let's say you take the oath by it and that which is written in it, Dvar Kayamin. Then we're going to say that the oath is binding. So the Gemara says, Katani b'mashe kasav Dvar Kayamin. The Gemara asks the obvious question on the Brisa. If you take the oath, if you take the oath, says the Gemara, Katani says in the Brisa, Mashe kasav Dvar Kayamin, Mashe kasav Tzarcha Meimer. So if you say that if you take the oath on that which is written in it, then the oath is binding. Then why do we have to do the next category? If you take the oath on it and that which is written in it, the oath is binding. It's obvious. So that was the question that the Gemara asks. So Amar Rab Nachman, first attempt to deal with this question. It comes from Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman says, "Well, kasha had the machta oraisa ara had the nakole biyadei." One is where the Torah scroll is on the ground in front of you, and one is where you're holding it in your hands. So it doesn't mean that it's literally on the ground, the Ran says. It means that it's on like a table in front of you, but you're not holding it. And so what's the difference? Machdal ara, if the Torah is on the ground, date agvile, then he's really, his intent is to basically, his intent is basically on the parchment, on the gvil, and not on the words that were in it. And so therefore, whereas Nakal Abiyade Daital Askara Shabbat, where if he's holding it, then we're going to say his intent is on the names of God that are mentioned in it, and then it's binding. So therefore, how do we draw this distinction? So if he's holding the Torah in his hands, then even if he says B'masha Kasava, we're going to say his intent was on the askaros that are in it, because since he's holding it, then it's very clear that his intent was on the oath. But if it's on the ground, if he just says ba, it's not going to be enough. It needs to also say b'masha kasava. So if the Torah isn't, if he's not holding it, it's on the ground, and he says b'masha kasava, then we're going to say it's possibly just a reference to the parchment. And so therefore his vow is not going to be binding. But if he says ba or b'masha kasava, then it will be binding, because then he's holding it. But if he's holding, because then it's clear that it's for the name of God. But if he's holding it in his hands, then if he just says b'masha kasava, then we're going to say that it refers to the askaros, and he doesn't need to mention and he doesn't need to mention ba. Okay, so v'ba is saying, that's the first answer. That's Reb Nachman. Or alternatively, you could say that we can explain the brayso as follows: the machtal ara, that it's on the ground in both cases. Even though it's on the ground, it's on the table. Kivan da amar b'masha kasava mahani v'zuvein tzarach omer zu katani. So no, we're talking about a scenario where it is on the ground, and even though it's on the ground, since he says b'masha kasava, since he says that which is written, and in both cases it's on the ground, but since he says that which is written in it, then it's going to be sufficient to say that he's swearing by the name of God. And not only not only in a case where he says b'masha kasava, and for sure in a case where he says ba'u b'masha kasava. It's even less of a chiddush, but that's sometimes the way braysos and mishnayos work. They say this, and for sure in this case as well. That's the second approach, and the third approach takes the opposite way. Or else you could say, alternatively, you could say kula mitziyasa nami nakal abiyadi. That in both scenarios, it's not that it's on the ground. In both scenarios, he's holding it. And it's teaching us, given the nakal abiyadi, that since he's holding it, afagavdu amar elabah, then even though he only says ba, command amar kamasha kasabadami. Since he only says ba, then we're going to say it's as though he says ba ukamasha kasaba. Because he's holding it, it's as though he says what's inside the Torah, not just the parchment, but also what's in it. And so therefore we're going to say that's why the oath is binding in all of these scenarios. Okay, so now we just do the next Mishnah, and then we'll review the Mishnah tomorrow. But the Mishnah says, let's say you take an oath, konem shani yashen, shani yashen, shani medaber, shani mahach. You take an oath about that, basically, the oath that he's prohibiting himself to sleep via just like a korban, I'm prohibiting sleep upon myself. Or if he says konem, like by a korban, I'm prohibiting speech upon myself, or shani mahalech, or I'm prohibiting walking. So Omar Isha, or if he says to his wife, Konim Shani Misham Sheikh, where he's prohibiting intercourse with his wife, he's actually in violation. The vow takes effect, and then he's going to be in violation of the prohibition of do not make your words yachel, do not profane your words. So that is our Mishnah. So the Gemara is going to ask the question. Gemara has to explain why is this vow taking effect under these circumstances? The Gemara is basically going to explain the Mishnah in one of two scenarios. Either he's making it a conditional, a prohibition with the condition. He's saying, Konem inai b'shena hayom, I'm not going to sleep today, im ishan lemachar. If I'll sleep tomorrow, then it's prohibited upon me to sleep today. And so therefore, we're going to say that he's not allowed to sleep today because we're worried that if he'll sleep today, it's for sure that he's going to come to the prohibition of Bal Yachel because once he sleeps tomorrow, he's in violation of the fact retroactively that he slept today. That's the first approach of the Gemara. And then the second approach of the Gemara to explain this Mishnah is going to be that he takes an oath that he's not going to sleep today. And since sleeping is something that there's not tangible, we're not going to say that the vow is biblically binding, but we're going to say he's over Bal Yachel Midrabanan rabbinically. That's the answer that Ravina is going to give in the Gemara on Daf Tesva. Okay, so we'll stop here, and God willing, we'll pick this up later today and tomorrow. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Yeah, sure.